Well, welcome everyone to Trinity International University. I was approached a couple of weeks ago by a few professors who said, why don't we get up a debate discussion, if you will, on the presidential election? And Dr. Cliff Williams has spearheaded that. Where is Cliff? Is he here? He's hiding in the back here. Cliff, raise your hand again. Thank you, Cliff, for bringing this about. We have about an hour and 15 minutes scheduled, and what I want to do is kind of give you guys a layout of what we're going to be doing and what the purpose is behind it, and introduce the participants, and then we can get started. Before I do, I'm going to open us in a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the privileges that we have as professors and students here at Trinity, and as citizens of the United States. I pray, Father, that you would be with us in our deliberations this hour and 15 minutes, and then again as we deliberate right up to the election. I pray for our country that you would be with us. Bless our time tonight. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, the purpose of the event. We've been doing some thinking about it, and in all honesty, I want to give a little bit of apology. Those of you who've seen my Facebook site and so forth may think, man, Firestone's going to have one of those knockdown debates here again today. That's not exactly what we have in store for you. We do have 4 professors, 2 on each side of the presidential ledger, you might say. They will be making positions for their respective candidates and giving reasons for that. But we're not going to be setting this up for a long 1 hour and 15 minute knockdown and so forth. What we'd like to do is just allow you to hear some of their thinking, some of what they have to say about it. Then we're going to open the floor to you guys to ask questions. And they will respond as appropriate to the questions that you raise. So one of the objectives here is to model thoughtful Christian dialogue about complex topics. Secondly, to demonstrate civil dialogue, which sometimes we don't see in the broader political sphere. To educate the audience about key important issues in the 2012 election and different positions that one might hold relative to them. To sensitize the audience to the connections between the Christian worldview and specific political issues, including those that may not have a very clear-cut Christian response to them. But like I said before, I have asked the professors here to advocate for one candidate and the positions of one candidate in the face of these complex questions. So that's the sort of debate side of it. And then we're going to open it up to a broader discussion. I really asked them to look at 2 things. One was, what kind of worldview or belief system or vision does the candidate have, and why should that appeal to us? And secondly, what are the key issues, as you understand, the linchpin issues that you think should turn our sights toward one candidate or another? So it's the general scope and the specific question. I asked them to give us something on that in their opening statements. So as far as the layout here, we're going to spend the first 4 minutes for each of them giving an opening statement. Then we're going to give them a 2-minute response time where they can pontificate, if you will, on what the other side has said. And then we're going to immediately open it up to you guys to chime in and state what you have to say and a question that you would like to pose for the panelists. Is that clear? Does that make sense to you? If we have time at the end, they may get a chance to give a closing comment, or we may just find a neat and natural time to end somewhere around 8:15. We'll see how that goes. All right, without further ado, let me introduce the panelists for you. I'm going to start with the people who go on the right-hand side, which would symbolize, of course, the Republican side, Mitt Romney. You guys want to come up? This is Professor Brad Gundlach in history, and Professor Paul Bialek in mathematics. They'll be presenting a case for Mitt Romney. Our other 2 professors here, Matt Heller and Bill Moulder from Psychology and Biblical Studies.
hope that's not a foretaste of things to come. Oh, gee.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, you get it.
That was Bill Moulder dramatically illustrating the fall.
Okay, well, as I said, each person will have 4 minutes. We're going to start with the incumbent on the far left and move our way from left to right. And I've got my trusty stopwatch here, and we have Dr. Bill Moulder. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. It's important to assess a candidate's character and a candidate's position on issues which are most vital. Assessing character is difficult and, of course, tends to be subjective, and we are probably less fair in judging the character of candidates with whom we disagree and more forgiving of those with whom we agree. So I am withholding judgment on the character issue. Issues are, of course, many and complex, and rarely will we agree with any candidate on all issues. So we must decide based on the priorities of the issues. Separating candidates' actual stand from their rhetoric is difficult, so it's important to try to get information which is objective and neutral from unbiased sources. Also something hard to do, but not impossible. Issues of social justice are primary concerns for me. This means the treatment of the poorest and most vulnerable in our country, especially children and elderly living in poverty. Despite misgivings about the health care plan of the Obama administration, I'm glad that health care coverage has been extended to millions who previously lacked access. 3 of my siblings have been or still are without adequate access to medical care, despite the fact that they have always been working or at least actively looking for a job. Living on the North Shore, one of the wealthiest communities in the world, we get a very unbalanced picture of what America is like. When I return to my roots in rural Indiana, I see a different America, where there is chronic unemployment, towns with rusting factories, people selling anything they can do without just to make ends meet. We would get a very similar picture of deprivation in many urban areas. In Chicago, gangs, gun violence, children killed every day, or in West Virginia and Mississippi, the poorest states in the country. In 2011, there were 15 million children in poverty in the U.S. 15 million children in poverty, 21% of all children. That's from the U.S. Census data of 2011. 25 of those under the age of 6, 5.5 million in 2010. There are 46.2 million Americans total in poverty. These are the census data. Of the elderly, there are 22.5 million women over 65, 11.5%, and 1 million men, 6.6% of men living in poverty. These are shocking statistics for one of the wealthiest countries in the world. As I've tried to understand the platforms of our 2 candidates, and is there anyone who does not wish we had some other choices? It seems to me that President Obama's policies would help more our struggling neighbors, and Governor Romney's would help most the upper 1%, his fellow millionaires and billionaires who are spending heavily to get him elected, a telling situation. We need a president who understands and cares deeply about the last and the least. I do not believe in the so-called trickle-down economic theory works. Let the richest keep more of their wealth and it will trickle down to the needy. The gap between the wealthiest and the poorest has widened significantly and surely would had not more been done by President Obama and had he not taken on some of the wealthiest and most powerful Americans. Instead of the trickle down, we have the stream up to the richest. I want a president who would stop this bleeding, as Obama has tried to do. Less government regulation of our financial industry would surely return us to the situation which brought it to our economic collapse. The American economy is not a kayak which can be turned on a dime and taken into tiny streams. It is an ocean liner which takes miles to turn around. If we change captains, the ship will continue in the direction, perhaps it into a field of icebergs for miles before a new captain can turn it around. On the abortion issue, for those who are one-issue voters or think this issue outweighs all others, I would ask this. What can the president do to reverse the abortion on demand situation? Appoint Supreme Court justices? But will they vote as you hope? witnessed that conservative Chief Justice Roberts joined liberals on the court to uphold the health care mandate. You can't be sure of the vote the way you want to do. And do we really want a court stacked on just one issue? We need to end abortion, but another way, constitutional amendment or
That's
what?
time. Thank you. All right, I give an extra 30.
Oh, thanks.
Matt Heller.
Okay. For my bit, I'd like to demonstrate some of why I'm supporting Obama this evening in this debate by laying out a number of issues that I think have been important in recent elections. I would suggest that one way to approach an election is to consider a list such as this one. It doesn't have to be exactly mine, but it could be similar, where each candidate will fall either more or less on each of the issues. Some will be more important to you, some will be less important to you, but because no candidate will match your criteria perfectly, you should decide based upon issues such as these what would be most critical to you. I will begin with what has probably been the most talked about issue in this election, the economy, because I know that will come up at some point. I think for this country, that's sort of the big question. There's the old saying, it's the economy, stupid. I'm sure that I'll just make 3 brief points about this, and then if there are other questions later on, I'm sure we'll get back to it. But first of all, there's often argument about whether Obama did as good a job as, say, McCain would have done. This is a completely academic question. There's no way to prove this. There's no way to know this. It's ideology. You look at trends. You can look at computer models and so on, but we don't have a control group. We can't go back 4 years and put McCain in office and see what would happen. I happen to think that we are better off now than we were 4 years ago. I think there is some economic indicators that show that. And I don't give Obama all the credit for that. The Senate's involved, the Fed is involved, there are lots of forces involved here. But that's one issue. Taxation is another issue with the economy. Most people instinctively react against raising taxes on themselves. We don't want to pay more money to the government ourselves. However, this is not an easy question, because if you look at some of the data on some of the happiest countries in the world, they also happen to be the most highly taxed countries in the world, places like Sweden and Denmark, where they pay taxes above 50%. So just because taxes rise doesn't mean that you have a worse life. In fact, the standard of living is very high in the Scandinavian countries. Third issue, and the last one on the economy I'll mention, is just Social Security and other entitlement, so-called entitlements are often lumped in together here. I think that the whole political system in America is broken on this issue. Nobody is giving any grounds. It really depresses me when I look at politics sometimes. My personal opinion is that if the government were actually functioning properly and there was some compromise and give and take, that we would be doing much better than the Republicans blocking everything the Democrats proposed and vice versa. But neither party is really doing a whole wonderful thing with that. Bill has already talked about poverty, and that's another economic issue, so I'll skip over that for now. A second issue we could think about, should the federal government be large or small? I think I'll say just one thing related to this, that I would rather have a well-organized, efficient government which can accomplish more than I can on my own. This is why we have governments, to do things that we can't do on our own. I'm not so concerned about how large or small the government is. I'm concerned about how well it runs. And so that, I would suggest, is the important question there. And there are probably lots of ways that it doesn't run very well, but those are issues that may or may not be Democratic or Republican. A third big issue would be defense, military spending. How should we use the armed forces? What are our policies towards terrorist states and so forth? I personally feel that both candidates are wrong in their military position right now. To my mind, we should be shrinking the military spending, not keeping it stable as Obama proposes or increasing it as Romney proposes. But Obama is closer to my position on this, and so I would tend to think that Obama would be a better choice. Healthcare is the last major point I'll mention, which obviously gets a lot of play. I believe strongly, again, that healthcare should be, if not a right, at least readily available, at least basic healthcare to everyone. I think that the Affordable Care Act, what people call Obamacare, does go a long way in that direction. It doesn't fix everything, but it is at least an attempt. Romney's threats to repeal that would just throw everything into disarray, including the healthcare system currently. And we currently, well, the other issues that I will not talk about, but you should continue to think about and feel free to ask questions later, are education, foreign policy, immigration, energy policy, the environment, human rights issues, and abortion and other bioethical issues like that. So lots more to talk about if you want to bring those up, but those are just a few to start us off.
All right, thank you. Dr. Brad Gundlach will start for Romney's side.
Okay. It's one of my guiding principles in political questions that there is no perfect candidate and no perfect solution. We live in a fallen world, and even the most sanctified among us are still sinners. I don't trust to particular personalities. Like the framers of our Constitution, I believe that power easily corrupts, one way or another. Those in power often don't see their own abuse of their power. They may congratulate themselves for taking a bold stand or making the tough decision that actually was done by the overextension of their power. In short, I place a very high value on the constitutional separation of powers and our system of checks and balances, and I think it unwise to trust to the charisma of any personality or leader. And so I was wary of the extremely high hopes many entertained of Barack Obama in 2008. The fact that he blends black and white is certainly a plus. That he speaks well and movingly, inspires confidence and exudes warmth, and a love of his fellow man and woman, these are all undeniable pluses. His lack of experience did concern me. The nearly messianic expectations of him concerned me even more. And the actual experience of his administration in the last 4 years has not allayed my concerns. I approached the 2012 season, election season that is, frankly, rather weary of politics. And when I walked into my local public library and saw this cover of Mad Magazine, I had a good laugh. It says, "Welcome to Election Hell," and it has Alfred E. Newman with a Romney demon on the one shoulder and an Obama demon on the other. And I think that we sometimes feel that we're stuck choosing the lesser of two evils. Yes, I was rather weary of politics. I was not excited by the long campaign season and not fired up about any of the Republican contenders. I usually vote Republican, but have not been all that happy with my party on several fronts. Nasty campaign tactics, overzealous commitment to an ever larger military, a tendency to extremes rather than moderation, lack of concern about the environment, to name a few. But my concerns about the ideology and tactics of the Obama administration outweigh these bothersome aspects of the Republican Party. I'll sketch those concerns in a minute. A word about Mitt. Mitt Romney is not my ideal of a candidate, but he is better in my view than President Obama. You'll see that a lot of my comments are more push from Obama than pull from Romney. President Obama has a proven record, Mitt Romney has a proven record of working successfully with the opposition party, as he did in Massachusetts. He takes seriously our nation's moral obligation to get out of the astronomical debt burden that we have built up over the course of several administrations, not just the present one, earlier ones too of the other party, but we've got this big debt, and we have a moral obligation not to pass that on or increase it for children and grandchildren. Romney believes in balanced and limited power in the federal government, and he upholds the right to life and our constitutional rights to the free exercise of our religion. He showed himself in the debates to be a good and strong leader, an incisive decision maker. He doesn't impress me on the stump, making speeches, but he did indeed impress me with his smarts and his command in debate. How many minutes do I have?
Got about a minute.
Okay. As I have said, I have grave concerns about President Obama. I'll mention four of them briefly. First and foremost, I'm concerned about his arrogation of power. He took us into armed conflict in Libya without a congressional go-ahead, prompting a Tribune cartoonist to picture the president at his desk in the Oval Office holding files labeled Libyan Obama, and the secretary's voice comes over the intercom. "There's a Mr. Nobel out here. He says you have something of his and he wants it back." You may remember that he was awarded the Nobel Prize before he had done anything. Failing to get his DREAM Act through Congress, President Obama halted the deportation of undocumented immigrants under 30. I don't think that's necessarily a bad policy. I mean, the DREAM Act thing might have been a good thing. I'm not taking a position on the DREAM Act, but I do vigorously oppose the president's refusal to enforce the law of the land. He did the same thing with the Defense of Marriage Act in February of 2011. When pressured by gay rights groups, well, first of all, he said he wouldn't defend the Defense of Marriage Act if it were challenged in court, and then when pressured by gay rights groups, he announced that he would not enforce it either. Here again is the executive branch functionally negating the law of the land. Worst of all, his administration's Department of Health and Human Services has mandated under Obamacare that employer health care plans must cover abortion-inducing contraceptives.
Time's up. Thank you.
I liked. Okay. Thanks. That's fine. I liked watching Barack Obama speak at his convention. He's an inspiring speaker, and during the debates, I find myself saying yes, like when he wanted to hire 100,000 math and science teachers. I thought that was a great idea. And yet, I'm still inclined to vote for Romney for the following reasons. For one thing, Barack Obama can talk a good game, but plans, he can talk a good game, but he's not the challenger. He's the incumbent. So we can look at his record. We can see what he's done over the past 4 years. He's had a full term. One of his major accomplishments would have been the Affordable Care Act. And I'd agree with my colleagues here. Something needed to be done about health care. There are too many uninsured people, and it's appalling that insurers can deny people for pre-existing conditions. So I like many of the provisions in the Affordable Care Act. Unfortunately, the act was adopted in an unsustainable way. The only reason it appears to be sustainable is that the act, if you look at a 10-year window, the act doesn't kick in until 2014. So we're not looking at the full 10-year window. And that's why the numbers are a little off. But it's going to be a drag on our economy for years to come. Also, it was done in a highly partisan fashion, without a single vote from the Republicans, which is deeply disturbing. Now, I fully admit there are some Republicans who would never cooperate with Barack Obama, even if he were the Messiah. But even so, this is really a trend in his past. In Illinois, he didn't need to work with Republicans because we're few and far between. In Washington, he really hasn't worked with them. And I don't see any reason to believe that would turn around in a second term. So as far as I can see, the health care, we're just headed for disaster. Ditto with Social Security and Medicare, those are just disasters. When I was born, there were 5 workers supporting every retiree. Nowadays, there are 3 workers, and in 20 years, there'll be 2 workers supporting every retiree. That is financially unsustainable. We're going to have to raise taxes to unacceptable levels, or somehow reduce benefits, or raise the retirement age, and we just keep kicking this can down the road. And we need a leader who can do something about this. And unfortunately, it hasn't happened under Barack Obama. I'm not going to give him all the blame, but he's the man in charge. He needs to be able to work with the opposite side on this. I'm concerned about gay marriage. My problem, we all have gay friends and colleagues. Well, not at Trinity. Not so much. Yes, but my concern is not, in some ways I can have a live and let live policy. Not in the church. I mean, in the church you would condemn it, but outside the church, I can have a live and let live policy. And yet I'm just concerned about Barack Obama's support for gay marriage and the implications. Some may deride it as a slippery slope, but I can already see society headed in that direction. Students, for instance, in Illinois, the state no longer places foster children with Catholic charities because of Catholic charities' homophobic attitude. That's deeply disturbing. And you can just see the handwriting on the wall that someday the federal government might crack down on this institution and say, we don't like your policies on homosexuality. We're not going to let students with federally guaranteed loans go to your institution. And again, you may think that's a slippery slope, but you can just see it heading in that direction. And that really concerns me. Abortion's a good point. It's not like abortions are going to be here with Barack Obama and here with Mitt Romney. It just doesn't work that way. Yes, the president can impose some
30
restrictions.
seconds.
But even so, my concern is the funding of abortions overseas. I'm appalled by that. Obama was elected because of the economic crisis, and he's failed to deal with that. His first priority was health care, as opposed to the economic crisis. I think the best thing we can do to help the poor is to help them find jobs. He really hasn't done much along that. Bill is concerned about the vulnerable. I am too. Who's more vulnerable than a child inside the womb? That deeply disturbs me. Romney has spent his career turning around failing institutions, and the U.S. government is one institution that really needs to be turned around.
All right, well, thank you. We are now in the response time, and we're going to continue with the same order, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Bill Moulder to respond to what he's heard from the other side.
Okay, I was going to say a bit more about the abortion issue. I think it's important that we have a consistent pro-life position. That means not just forbidding abortion, but also euthanasia. And I think we should care as much about children once they're outside the womb as we did for them while they were in the womb. And so that reinforces what I said earlier about my concern about the number of children living in poverty in this country and the need to do something. While we're trying to turn around the economy and improve the job situation, we certainly need to keep in place government programs that care for children who have no responsibility for the situation in which they find themselves. I just briefly want to mention some other issues, too, that we should be talking about. More on foreign policy. I think we certainly need a more balanced Mideast policy, more support for Palestinians, building a relationship with the Arab and Muslim world, greater willingness to call Israel to account for its unfair treatment of Palestinians, less foreign aid to wealthy countries, comparatively wealthy countries like Israel, and less to them and more to the poor countries who need it, like Haiti. I think President Obama would do more to protect our environment and to provide for our energy needs by looking to the future. I don't know if you heard the second debate, but in that debate, Governor Romney accused President Obama of reducing oil production on government lands and taking away oil leases, which was only half the story. Obama said we've actually increased the production, and the oil leases that were taken away were for companies that were not drilling. That's why they were taken from them. They were sitting on leases for years without drilling. So either Governor Romney did not know the full story, or he refused to tell it and misrepresented the facts. Anyway, we need to think about energy, protecting our environment, and education should something you should all be concerned about. Governor Romney said he would take away Pell Grants. He said, if you need money, talk to your parents. Well, that's fine if your parents earn $25 million a year and more, like Governor Romney. But if your parents probably don't, I don't think talking to your parents is going to supply all the money you need for your education. How much more time do I have?
15 seconds.
That's time.
Okay.
Let's move on to,
This one?
well, hold on.
Matt can go. That's
Yeah,
fine.
Matt,
It
we're
doesn't
going to
matter.
go the same order.
All right.
Oh, the same order?
I'm going to go. So I would say a few points that I wanted to address regarding my colleagues' issues that they brought up. One was that Obama's tactics are bad, that he's highly partisan. I mean, I am not in Washington, and nor can I claim to be an expert on this, but I do know that he campaigned broadly on bipartisan, reaching across the aisle, and so forth and so on. I also know psychology more than politics, and there's a lot of research on conflict, and it's pretty much an established point that cooperation does not spread, conflict spreads. And so if you're competing with somebody, you'll get other people to compete with you. If you're cooperating with them, it's not as contagious to the people that you're dealing with. So if you go into Washington with a cooperative attitude, and 90% of people are competing with you, you're going to become more of a competitor than a cooperator. I think that is a reasonable hypothesis of what went on. Again, I'm not in Washington, but I try to casually follow political reporting. And I can recall numerous times, especially in the earlier part of the healthcare negotiations and so on, where Obama and the Democrats with him were trying to negotiate. They were going to the different members of Congress trying to find some sort of compromise. They, in fact, did compromise big parts of the Affordable Care Act, and they brought in the healthcare industry to give them a seat at the table and so on and so forth.
30 seconds.
In the end, the Republicans blocked over and over, just completely refused to vote even one of them with Democrats over and over and over again. It became almost childlike. It was. I mean, I wasn't personally extremely Republican, but watching that, or Democratic rather, but it just made me sort of a little bit ill. Finally, I believe from what I've read anyway, that Obama did try to address both the economy and healthcare, and he felt that healthcare was innately bound up with economic healing in our country, and so it's not that he was ignoring the economy early on, and in fact, a lot of measures of the economy do show that it's improved. The stock market is up 15.2%, real corporate profit is up 77%, real GDP per capita is up 1.5%, inflation is only up 2%. So there are a lot of indicators that the economy actually has improved quite a bit in the last 4 years. So.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Gundlach.
My concern has not been as much with Obama's partisan tactics as with his irrigations of power. When the partisan thing broke down. It was admittedly because of Republican intransigence that is, they dug in their heels, that he dug in his heels. I think a good leader doesn't respond in kind. The psychological studies are about sort of average people. We're asking a leader to rise above the average and to do the right thing. I don't think he did a very good job of that. But my big concern really is that when Congress wouldn't do what he wanted, he found ways to get around Congress and basically to subvert the law of the land. And I'm deeply disturbed about that. And in the case of the Health and Human Services thing, with this mandate for abortion-inducing contraceptives to be provided by places like Trinity, that's not even getting around Congress. That's just a sheer ideological thing of his that I think bodes very badly for the future. I wanted to say a word about, the social justice things that Dr. Moulder brought up at the beginning. President Obama is very good at talking about government taking care of people. And I think that that's a very attractive thing to hear. And we like to think of the golden rule as somehow applying in politics. There are some issues with government taking care of people, though. Hold on while I find it. I had this written down. Yes, his is a big government, modest redistribution of wealth, government takes care of people kind of view. But racking up unimaginable debt ultimately hurts people, and breeding dependency on government programs hurts people too. Am I out of time?
You got another.
I got a second.
30 seconds.
Go online and Google how much is a trillion, and take a look. They've got these videos on YouTube that show you how much $1 trillion is. If you stacked up $100 bills to get $1 trillion, you need 2 pallets high, the size of a football field, and that's $1 trillion. And we have way more than $1 trillion in debt and continuing to rise. And I think Romney is right that it is a moral issue that we must address.
Thank you. Dr. Bialek.
I'd agree with that. We talked about what we can do for the kids. One of the best things we can do for kids is not to pass on debt to them. You are going to pay for my retirement, and I'm just passing on this $16 trillion Visa bill to you. And that's sickening. That's terrible. I don't like that at all. But thanks. There are actually certain things I prefer about Obama, frankly. We talked about the military. Obama would like to increase the military budget slightly. Romney would like to increase it more. Frankly, I'm more with Obama on that issue. I don't think we need to increase it that much. But as for Obama policies helping the poor and Romney policies helping the rich, one of the best things you can do for the poor is to get them jobs. And this is what's happened since the start of the recession in 2008. So this one line down the middle, this one line at the bottom here shows you the percentage of jobs that have been lost over the last, the percentage of jobs that have been lost and then have been regained during the course of the recession. In all these other post-war recessions, yes, you lose jobs and then you regain them. But this one line, this one curve down at the bottom shows that we're still stubborn. We still have stubborn unemployment. And in fact, college graduates are especially prone to this. I think, for example, of the comment that Paul Ryan had at the Republican National Convention he just had this vision of this 22-year-old college graduate sleeping on his parents' couch and looking at that faded Obama poster on the wall, unemployed or underemployed. It's troubling. Fortunately, Romney does not want to cut taxes he says he would cut tax rates for the rich, but he would offset that with deductions. So in effect, he would not be giving more money to rich people, which is encouraging because traditionally Republicans just have this thing about giving more money to rich people, which I frankly disagree with. Yes, taking less money from rich people. But as for Obama policies helping the poor, I think the best thing we can do for the poor is to help them to find jobs. And I'm just concerned that Barack Obama hasn't done the job.
All right. Well, thank you. We are now into the Q&A side. So unfortunately, I don't have a roaming microphone, but I've got a volunteer right up front here for the first question. You got? Stand up there. Come a little closer.
All right. Check. All right. So first of all, I just want to say you got to talk about moral and talking about job loss, right? So I want to bring up the warehouse Bain here in Illinois, and so basically Bain is cutting all the jobs and they're outsourcing it to China. And Mr. Romney over here owns probably about 52% of that in stocks, so you're clearly an owner of this company and you're for your stocks. So what does that say about you coming into office and really helping out jobs and moral, people losing their jobs?
Yes. I think Romney has addressed this issue to some extent because one of the charges against him is that Bain Capital was destroying companies or shipping jobs overseas. But from what I understand, those were things that were occurring after he had left Bain Capital. And if I'm wrong about that, correct me tomorrow.
You're never wrong on the facts. Okay. He's Mr. Faxman. Okay. Question in the back. Speak loudly if you would.
Yes. I just was wondering. There's a lot of talk about how can we help the poor get jobs or get a better education. Obama seems intent on continuing to cut the numbers of people in the military and the different GI Bill fundings to the military, which is how I got to school. I don't be going to this school because of my service to the country. And that has historically been a large supporter of the lower to middle class persons going to college. How does he contrast saying that he wants increased college attendance for poor and middle class students while cutting GI Bill benefits and numbers of military personnel?
Oh, I only know this from Obama's website, so I'm hoping that he isn't lying about this. But he claims that during his administration, he passed legislation that expanded the GI Bill for veterans. So they actually apparently, and again, I don't know the bill or anything, but they say that they passed legislation that actually gave more benefits to GIs post-Afghanistan and Iraq.
In the initial year of his service, in the initial first year, yes. Since then, it's been much every single year.
Do you want to say something?
So in the first year, yes, he did, but then it's that amount has been cut every single year since then.
I can't say that we need to keep the military large so that we can provide job opportunities for those in the lower middle class and the lower class. I will say, though, that for those who have served, thank you for serving. We owe you an enormous debt for putting your life on the line, and we need to treat well those who have sacrificed themselves for our country.
And I just want to speak a little more broadly to this issue of cuts. I don't know how many of you watched the first debate, but when Jim Lara asked the candidates to differentiate themselves from each other on how they would address the deficit and the debt, and what in particular they would cut, Mitt Romney turned to the camera, I guess I should say. He turned to the camera, spoke to us through the camera, and said, the first thing I want to say is that the reduction of the national debt and of the deficit that we run in the budget every year is a moral issue that has to be addressed as such, and we cannot just keep passing that on. You've heard me say that before, okay? And then he went on to name some things that he would cut and some principles that he would use in approaching the question of cuts. I can tell you right now, I would not agree with everything he wanted to cut. When he said he wanted to cut funding to public television. I actually think it's good that we have funding to public television. But the thing is, he was really willing to say we actually need to cut some things. And the problem we've got is that there's always going to be somebody who's going to say, don't cut this thing because I benefit from this thing. And that's what's gotten us into this pickle. We continue to spend and spend and spend because it's nice if government gives us these benefits. But someday, somebody has got to pay. And so, President Romney said, President Romney, not yet, we'll see. Former Governor Romney, I've never quite understood why he keeps getting called governor when he's not one anymore. But former Governor Romney said, if it's not worth going into debt to China for, then we shouldn't do it. And that he should apply that rule. Now, I'm quite sure that many of the things that he would probably want to cut more things than I want to, and in different areas than I would want to cut. But the president is not a monarch. The president has to propose these things to Congress, and the budget process is a process that goes through Congress. And as long as the president and Congress are respecting each other's check and balance on each other's power, I'm not too worried. Okay, I am worried when a president finds ways to get around Congress and not enforce the law of the land.
Did you want to comment on that?
But somebody has to make some cuts, and somebody is always going to be unhappy with it.
Let's
and
take
we
a
have to
brief,
get past that.
brief response from the Obama side, and I'll take the question right now.
Well, I just want to reinforce that point, actually, that we need to increase revenues, but nobody wants to pay more taxes. And we need to cut spending, but no one wants their favorite government support cut. So it's going to hurt somebody, preferably everybody, but nobody wants to pay more taxes. Nobody wants their favorite programs cut. But we got to do both things.
All right, question right there. If you could speak up for us.
My question is kind of mostly for the Mitt Romney side, but you claim that Barack Obama has been really nonpartisan, really forcing his parties through, and you claim that Mitt Romney would really reach across the aisle and try to work with both parties to get both jobs done. How do you defend this claim that even though within his own party, as seen as a national convention, when he steamrolled third-party candidate Ron Paul, when he was still technically running for the nomination, and he had many Republican supporters at the party who were very vocal about it. How can you say that he's going to reach across the aisle when he steamrolls people within his own party?
You want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, there's some, politics is an interesting game. Politics and sausage, those are two things you don't want to know how they're made. I have to confess, I am not familiar with that Ron Paul incident. It's a delicate balance because there are some times when you want to include people, but you're not quite sure what they're going to say. Sometimes they're live wires. So I have to be honest, I'm not sure about that one. I will say, however, that Mitt Romney had to work with Democrats in Massachusetts because his legislature was 75% Democratic. And yet he was still able to function effectively as a governor. Mitt Romney, Barack Obama didn't have to do that. Didn't have to do that in Illinois, and he didn't have to do that in his first term. And that's one thing that really hurt him. That's one reason why he got, the first half of his first term. He really got shellacked in those midterm elections because of the unpopularity of the Affordable Care Act, which he just passed without Republican votes.
In answer to the Ron Paul situation, it was very clear that Romney was going to be the candidate and that the national convention is a big sort of rally the troops for the fight against the opposition being the Democratic Party. It was a prudential decision, a not very nice one for the followers of Ron Paul, but it was more important, I think, to the Republican ticket to get unified quickly and to aim their fire at the Democrats than to make peace with a rather small portion of the party. So the problem with politics is that all sorts of prudential decisions like this are being made, and most of the time you're stepping on somebody's toes. But in a situation where he actually did have to deal with the other party in Massachusetts, he proved himself able to do so successfully.
Any comment there?
I just want to say something briefly that I again get a bit depressed when I look at all the parties. I mean, just stepping outside of this whole thing, because I don't see a whole lot of cooperation going on with any of them. I'm quite concerned that with the 2 years ago elections, with the Tea Party being sort of swept into power, they're, from what I can tell, not willing to compromise on anything. And I don't see that boding well for Romney. I don't think that he can control that. I mean, maybe he can, but it seems unlikely that he can control that and make them all cooperative and play nice with each other and get bills passed. So I'm a little worried about that for all of us, I guess.
Aside from abortion and gay marriage, as for both candidates, what is an issue in which your faith interacts with the policy?
Every issue.
Well, yes, Matt said every issue, and I was going to say the same thing. Probably some issues more directly than others, but Christians know that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. It doesn't belong to us, and we should be seriously concerned about environmental issues. We should be concerned about stewardship of our wealth. We should be concerned about justice. We should be concerned about, well, really everything.
Yeah, I mean, human rights comes to mind, the torture issues, the death penalty. I think to some extent the way in which we use military power, not only for the people that we use it on, but for our own selves. I mean, we're losing money, but we're also losing lives when we do these sorts of things. These are all, for me, moral issues. at some level. Poverty, of course, tied up in the economy and so on. I mean, these are all, I can't really think of an issue that doesn't in some way, or isn't in some way influenced or filtered through my Christian worldview, I guess. Take my microphone.
Yeah, you won't be needing it. That's okay.
Knock Bill off the table.
Try that one.
Other issues that come to mind are undocumented immigrants, how you balance enforcing the rule of law versus having compassion on kids who were brought here when they were young and are here illegally through no fault of their own, or how you use the military. On the one hand, you can make the case biblically that there are legitimate circumstances in using the military, but wow, you just don't want to be a warmonger. That's not praised in Scripture.
I guess I would also say keeping promises. I think making one's word, be kind of your bond is an important principle of Christian character, and that the government as a whole has a responsibility to live up to some of its promises. So those things have to come into play when considering things like Social Security. I would also say that I think that Christian faith intersects with this stuff at just the level of how we treat opponents, okay, in the political process. In my answer to David Meneses a minute ago, it may have sounded like I said, well, politics is dirty and just get used to it. And that isn't at all where I want us to be. I would like to see a whole lot more honest, positive campaign tactics. I think that there's something deeply un-Christian about the way our political campaigns are run.
I would like this to be answered by both sides, but in regards to immigration, from what I understand, both candidates have kind of the same general idea of what they want to do. It seems like they both want to secure the border and streamline the process for people who want to come in legally. Mm-hmm. But what I don't understand is how either candidate is planning on accomplishing that goal. So I don't know if we can get a summary and then maybe a defense.
Dream Act, is that sort of thing?
But I don't know. We'll say something about it.
Go ahead.
Again, my understanding is that Obama originally was campaigning 4 years ago, sort of very pro legalizing immigrants, Dream Act, these sort of ideas, and that this has one of the disappointments, I think, with non-native so people who are not citizens, has been that he hasn't done a whole lot about that in the last 4 years. That's, I think, one of the legitimate gripes that people have against his last 4 years in government. He's kind of stirring up some stuff right now, maybe right conveniently before the election, but he hasn't done a whole lot. And so, but I think that if he, and this might be because of many reasons, but if he goes back to some of his campaign ideas from 4 years ago, that idea of sort of the gradual naturalization of people who are living here, the allowance of children born in America, children born in America who were brought here illegally before they were adults, those seem to be reasonable approaches from my perspective.
One thing that's tough is that both candidates tend to flip-flop on issues. I mean, Obama criticizes Romney for being a flip-flopper. Frankly, they both flip-flop. Barack Obama stated a couple of years ago that he as president could not simply issue an executive order saying that you couldn't deport these children of illegal immigrants, and then suddenly he turns around and does it. But of course, and Mitt Romney's flip-flop on various issues in the same way. I frankly would support the DREAM Act, but I don't know if we'll see that happen.
On the other side, if it's flip-flopping just to win votes, that's one thing. But for a candidate to change their mind because they think they really should change their mind, we should see that as a strong point, that someone is strong enough to say, well, I did believe this, I was going to do that, but I changed my mind, this would be a better policy. That would be a sign of strength, I think. As far as keeping promises, it's, of course, relatively easy to make grand promises when you're running for office. It's quite another matter to keep those promises. And so we can criticize President Obama for the promises he did not keep, I'm guessing if Governor Romney were to be elected, in a few years we'd be criticizing him for the promises he made and did not keep, because you simply cannot keep all the promises you make when you're trying to get elected.
Interestingly, I did not have President Obama in mind when I said that bit about keeping promises. I really was just talking generically and thinking about government as a whole, not candidates. You know, I want to just make a reflection here. I told Cliff and Chris, when we were talking about doing this, that I have some hesitation about sitting up here as some sort of expert, because, you know, nobody can be an expert on every issue. And I think we all feel kind of daunted by this flood of fact allegation, and then the fact checkers, and who's right, and how am I supposed to know what's going on? And if you try to keep some tally on every issue that's involved and then figure out which ones are the most important, it's very difficult to vote that way. So I would actually like to ask my other fellow panelists here, what do you do in the face of, you know, this surfeit of factual claims and counterclaims? How do you sort it through?
Well, that's a very good question. I try to look for some sort of a neutral source that provides information, factual information, in an unbiased manner as much as possible, and also presents it in a manner that's accessible and not so in such technical language, especially in the field of economics, that I couldn't understand it. The Chicago Tribune ran a series of articles last week, one issue per day for 5 days, outlining the positions of both candidates on the economy, on foreign policy, on Medicare, on energy, environment, etc. And those articles were basically descriptive of the positions of both candidates when those positions could be known, when they had said what their position was. So finding sources like that, and there are other sources you can find on the internet, but of course we need to evaluate the sources carefully to make sure they're reliable and unbiased.
So I have both my ideologically wonderful answer and then my more realistic answer, probably. The wonderful answer is, I mean, I sort of like Bill, I try to find multiple sources. I listen to public radio. I read stuff on the web. I try to go to sources that I know are both conservative and liberal, and I also try to go to sources that advertise themselves as being nonpartisan, and try and, because, you know, if everybody sort of is agreeing on the same thing, then you get the sense that probably is right. And if they're disagreeing, you can weigh the credibility of their arguments and so on. So, you know, to be honest, before I began preparing for this debate discussion about a week ago, I had casually followed politics, but I had not done a lot of research. So I can't really hold myself up as a icon of that and say 10 hours a week I was putting in the time doing this stuff. Which is why all my answers begin with, to the best of my understanding. But on the other hand, maybe the more realistic answer is that I occasionally find myself listening to a news coverage of something and just getting angry about it. And I think that reveals some underlying biases in my own, that I lean one way or the other. And I think, frankly, I tend to feel more angry when I hear about Republicans than Democrats. It wasn't like that 10 years ago. I've definitely changed in my political views on things in a number of ways for various reasons that I won't get into tonight, unless you can ask me later if you want. But so that's the sort of the gut check reaction. And I feel like that is probably how a lot of us make decisions. I posted on Facebook the other day, what is your strongest argument for candidate X? Like I did one for Obama and one for Romney at different times of the day. And the answers I mainly got were things like, well, he's not the other guy, or he's not stupid, or something like that. And so, like, these are not well-reasoned arguments, but I think that a lot of, we've sort of been reduced to that. It's all sound bites and advertisements and glitz and so on. So
I'd agree with what my colleagues have said. Two sites that are helpful I found were factcheck.org and PolitiFact.
And I'd just like to highlight, I'll answer my own question a little bit. I'd like to highlight something that Dr. Heller said. I think it is important with Dr. Moulder that you try to find sources that are less biased rather than more biased. If you guys, as I know most of you do, use the internet a lot, it's very easy to find very wild and extreme things that are said, especially on blogs. And, you got to watch out and try to find more reputable sources. But I will also say I don't trust anybody's claim to be unbiased or nonpartisan. And I think it's very important, as Dr. Heller said, to seek out both sides. Go to the more liberal sites and go to the more conservative sites. Hopefully the better ones. Go to the National Review and go to the Nation. I mean, those are two completely different magazines that you can consult online that take a pretty strong line one way or the other. And they're well known, they're reputable, but they represent both sides. And I think that's a very important part of the process.
If you were to look at my email, you would think I was a liberal Democrat because I supported Obama through the internet. If you would read my snail mail at home, you would think I was a conservative Republican because I vote Republican in the Lake County primaries because there are so few Democrats running for local office that there's no one running on the Democratic ticket. So the choice is made between Republican candidates in the primary. So I vote Republican in the primary. So I get information from both sides. And I could have brought a lot of, I won't use the word, junk on Romney that I get on the internet, but I just simply don't pay attention to most of that stuff because you just know it's not trustworthy. It's so biased.
I'd like to add one thing to what Dr. Gundlach said about looking at liberal and conservative news medias. I would argue to go one step further, and I think Dr. Gundlach would agree with me. Look at a media institution from outside the United States.
Oh, yes.
Perfect example, the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
The BBC is British represented, but they are very unbiased, and there is a good way to look at events in the United States through that. That's not the question I had, but I just wanted to add that. So,
good point.
Being unbiased is increased one step further by going outside the borders of the United States to look inside the United States, and that can really help. That can harm as well. But my question is mainly on, both candidates in the debate talked about gas prices and what they would do to try to combat gas prices. My only issue with that is, we know that gas prices are set on a world commodity-based market by a bunch of guys in the Middle East who control most of the production of oil in the world, and they set prices. President Obama says that he would increase drilling and increase oil production in the United States to bring the United States off of foreign oil. That's all well and good, except the gas prices and the oil prices will still be set by the people in the Middle East. So even if we are drilling our own oil and using our own oil, the prices are still coming from the Middle East. And I just wonder what you gentlemen's opinion, both on the Obama side and the Romney side, is on that matter and how we would solve that problem. Because I think oil prices are a huge part of the economy, and I think until oil prices are set in check a little bit better, the economy is going to continue to struggle. But I also think the president is smaller than oil and crude oil in that case, and gas prices. So I just open you guys up to opinions on that and how that would be solved on both sides, Republican and Democrat side.
I'd agree with you. Mitt Romney criticized Barack Obama because the gas prices are so high. But frankly, I think Barack Obama has only so much control over it. One reason gas prices are so high is that economies are slowly recovering. 4 years ago, gas prices were about $4.50 a gallon, and then gas prices tanked, pardon the pun, when the economy crashed, down to about $1.50 a gallon. That's just a reflection of the global economy. I'd agree with you. Also, regarding outside U.S. sources, I think The Economist, a British news magazine, is better than any of our news magazines. I'd agree with you.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, and I appreciate you bringing that point about outside sources. It's very important that we see ourselves as others see us from outside the U.S. And it's true that on the oil prices, there's a limited amount the president can do. The growing economies in China and India in particular are placing a higher demands on oil, which raises the prices. And when the Chinese economy took a dip, oil prices went down. What can the president do about that? Not much. But talks about rain, about energy independence can only go so far. Take, for example, the use of biofuels. Well, I come from Indiana, big corn-producing state, and the farmers are all happy about ethanol because it helps keep the prices of corn up, but it also raises the price of food for the poor.
That's right.
And ethanol can only help so much.
Can I just ask just a follow-up? I got one more question. Okay, go ahead. I'm going to move on to another question.
Not that this is my
most important question, right? Can you speak to how you weigh the faith of the candidate to the best of your understanding, whatever they say they are?
The faith. The faith.
The faith.
You want
Cool.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first because my answer will probably be short. I mean, I believe that Mitt Romney is a fairly devout Mormon, from what I can tell. He seems pretty devoted to the Latter-day Saints Church. And Obama, I mean, he's obviously more in the Protestant tradition with some liberal social leanings. And I can't really say much more than that. That's my understanding of them. I don't know that I don't know them well enough to say more.
I think it's important that in America, well, yeah, I guess I think this. I think in America, it shouldn't matter what the faith position is of the candidate, all other things being equal. I would have a problem with somebody who wants to impose Sharia law or something like that, okay? I mean, I guess I would be opposed to a Muslim president, for example. But that's because of some specific things about Islam. I'm not even sure I'd be opposed to a Hindu president, for example. In many ways, folks of some of the other world religions who hold them in a sincere way are more for family values and some of the moral positions that I take on things. What I'm concerned about in a leader is a basically honest character, a willingness to work with other people, and these issues of efficiency and ability, I think, are paramount.
I would agree with that, and I think that both candidates are sincere in their faith. Many people question, evangelicals, whether Obama really is a Christian, given some of his liberal positions. I don't think that's fair. He calls himself a Christian, and I think we should take his word for that. And both candidates have exemplary family lives, as far as I can judge. I'm not old enough to remember when John F. Kennedy ran for office, and there was great concern about having a Catholic president, that he may take orders from the Pope. Nowadays, that seems absurd that people were concerned about that, but you hear some people saying, well, wouldn't Romney take orders from the Mormon Church? He is a bishop in the Mormon Church. I'm not quite sure what that means for Mormons, but that he would take orders from the Mormon Church, I don't think we need to be too concerned about that.
Romans 13 talks about respecting government authorities, and the government authorities who existed at that time were non-Christians. So even if you were to say Mormons were non-Christians, which, yeah, I'm willing to accept a Mormon president. I'm fine with that.
Gun
control.
I heard some speculation about Obama wants to ban assault rifles, and I haven't heard anything about Romney. You guys clear that up?
Did you guys hear that question?
Yeah. He asked if, he said he'd heard that Obama wants to ban assault rifles, doesn't know about Romney, and do we know?
I can't say that I know for sure. No.
I don't really know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We're firing blanks here.
I don't know, but I think we need to take far more seriously than we have the problem of gun violence in this country. You talk to anyone who lives in especially poor parts of the city of Chicago, where children are killed every day in gun violence, something needs to be done. You want to talk about a moral issue. It's a moral issue that children are being murdered every day in this country. We need to do something about it. I don't know the position of the candidates necessarily, but we should certainly care, and we should press whoever is elected to take some action on this matter, it seems to me.
I think we have somebody as an answer.
There's somewhat of an answer on that issue with Romney. I definitely recommend you look at the debates over again. Both candidates came to the opinion that the issue goes far above gun rights and everything. Mitt Romney tends to go on the Second Amendment as a pro-Second Amendment, that the Constitution needs to be upheld, people need to be able to have guns and everything. But President Obama and Mitt Romney both went on the stance that the issue with violence, the issue that guns have, goes far above into the parents. And so I think you'll get an answer to your question about Romney and his gun policy if you go back and take a look at the debate again. And just type in 2012 debate gun rights or something, and that'll probably help you with your answer. I think that's a good answer too. Thank you.
both sides have talked about the environment as important, and I want to know what your candidate is going to do that's best for the environment, and what you're most concerned that the opposing candidate will do that's worse for the environment.
So my research on Obama turned up the following facts, as far as I know. He has apparently expanded wilderness protected areas more than anyone else in the last generation. And he also negotiated with other countries ocean rights, which had not previously been agreed upon between various nations in terms of how ocean territory is treated. Having said that, he also opened up a lot of Arctic and Gulf areas for oil drilling and other resource development. So he both, I think he sort of spins things more towards an environmental side of things, but he's actually been quite friendly to the Republican agendas in terms of energy development and so on. So that would be.
I think Obama is stronger on that position. I'm still for Romney. I mean, what you do, no, seriously. I mean, look, how often is it going to be the case that your candidate is like, the thumbs up on everything that you're concerned about? I said in my opening statement, I'm concerned about the environment, and I wish that the Republican Party were more concerned about it. I think that it is a Christian issue. I think that it involves our stewardship of the creation that God has given us.
Environment is inseparably related to energy policy, and so we need to find ways to move forward meeting our energy needs without destroying our environment. That means more emphasis on things like solar and wind and other sources of energy, and Obama has said that's the direction he wants to move. I don't know about Romney.
One of my concerns is not just what we do in the United States, but around the world. We can be the greenest country on the planet, and it only matters so much if China and India are just taking on the American lifestyle. That's a concern.
Yeah, another thing that has to go with environmentalism, if you ask me, I'll quickly say, people have to be willing to use less energy. People have to be willing to be less wasteful.
I wanted to say something about that earlier. The word I have not heard for years when it comes to energy is conserve. We used to talk about energy conservation. Now everybody just wants to use all the energy they can. They don't want to have to make any sacrifices in their lifestyle. That's another issue where we need to all consider making some cutback.
Looking for a question from non-Trinity folks. Anybody out there in the back?
Trinity.
Yes, I actually noticed that the issue of foreign policy is not touched upon at all. There was mention of how each candidate addressed military spending, but why do you believe that your candidate has the better vision and better skills to project a more positive vision of America around the globe, whether that's trade policy, military policy, diplomatic approaches? Why do you believe that your candidate will do a better job of foreign policy?
Well, this is more anecdotal, but everybody that I know who lives outside the United States seems to love Obama. He's vastly popular. In fact, in some cases, much more popular outside the U.S. than he is inside the U.S. And I think we can't underestimate the influence of somebody who other national leaders like and like to deal with and negotiate with. I think that he has good interpersonal skills, negotiating skills. As may be clear by this point in the evening, I'm not in favor of a strong military response to most international issues. I was a little bit disappointed with the Obama administration in the way that they handled Libya, although that was still fairly modest compared to, say, Iraq or Afghanistan. I appreciate the way that he's trying to get us out of those situations as quickly as possible, it seems anyway. I believe that his negotiating skills and his reliance upon negotiation, I think that Clinton as his Secretary of State is a good choice for those sort of things as well, and those seem to be, I feel like they've been doing a relatively good job of keeping international goodwill going with the United States.
Yeah, it wasn't an oversight. As I thought about various foreign policy issues, in this election at least, there really aren't. I think the differences between the two candidates are less dramatic than they've been in the past. One difference that concerns me, though, is Iran. as Iran marches towards a nuclear weapon. President Obama and Vice President Biden assured us that Iran would not get a nuclear weapon. But wow, that really concerns me. I mean, they can say it, but I just don't see them taking the steps to prevent that from happening. When you have a country that's seeking a nuclear weapon and threatens to wipe Israel off the map, you can just see the handwriting on the wall. It's almost biblical, but it's scary. And I'm concerned that Barack Obama hasn't taken the steps, hasn't leveraged his popularity around the world to build a coalition to squeeze the vice tighter around Iran.
What do you think Governor Romney would do with Iran?
Well, he says that he would be tougher on Iran, which is pretty vague. I'll admit that.
Any other non-Trinity questions? I see a person or two from North Suburban Church. Anybody out there want to throw something? All right. I saw some other hands here. Let me start us off.
But there's one that isn't repeated.
Good question. Oh, right here, James.
My question is about the cuts in military spending that you guys want. I just don't see that plausible with what you were saying about Iran being an issue, especially with almost every war that we've had military spending cut before we've taken mass casualties. I mean, when you have guys going into Iraq in Hummers that you have to put sandbags and bolt on armor, there's an issue. And I actually think there is going to be a conflict with Iran. So I don't see how you guys can justify that as a legitimate cut to that. So what would be your opinion on that? I just don't see how you guys can see that plausible.
Well, I would say the cuts that need to be made wisely. And sending our troops into combat ill-equipped and ill-prepared is not a wise cut. But some of our most expensive weapons in the military are weapons we cannot and must not use, and we can dispense with them. Unless we're prepared and really serious about carrying out an all-out nuclear war in which we destroy the Earth 50 times over, we could reduce a lot of those expensive weapons and some of our other military hardware that's very, very costly, that's probably not usable in an actual situation. It might pose a threat to the enemy, but so I would say cuts need to be made, but they need to be made wisely.
One of you want to speak first? Or?
I'm just anticipating that as the war in Iraq and Afghanistan wind down, that we won't need to devote as many resources to there. But I'd agree with you. We certainly can't return to the 1940s America or the 1916 America, which is isolationist, because that's really a way to get burned. I think of what the Romans said: if you want peace, prepare for war.
In 2009, the United States was spending $711 billion on our military, which is more than the next 50 countries combined. The next country in line was China, spending $120 billion, so less than a fifth of what we were spending. And China has the largest military in the world. They have about 1 million more soldiers than we do on active duty. But we are spending a mind-boggling amount of money on the military. I find it hard to believe that we could not cut back on that in some way. I mean, it's probably, yeah, I mean, we probably need to think of it. You hear these stories like that they spent $300 on a hammer and stuff like that. I mean, there have got to be ways to cut back on that.
And the point here is that, when you're looking to make cuts, you look to make cuts. That's all. And money that is spent on the military is money that cannot be spent somewhere else.
We have time for one more question, and I'm looking for somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Is there anyone out there who's got something in the back of their mind they'd like to see addressed that hasn't been? All right, the first hand I see, I guess I'll... Man, those are identical.
Yeah. Flip a coin.
Let's give it to the back. Your last question.
In the third debate, President Obama made mention of the U.S. having the strongest alliances that we've ever had in the history currently of the United States, and included Israel in that. How does he justify that against Israel's comments about being uneasy and flat out scared about how and their pursuit of a nuclear weapon?
I think, frankly, he's just pandering to the Jewish vote. He's saying that because he wants the Jewish vote in November. I think that's what it comes down to.
And Israel has political things to think about too, and their leaders need to sound like they're tough and that they have to be tough on everybody around them. Iran, and obviously being maybe the first one they're thinking of right now. So there's a lot of politics and gamesmanship going on, both on our political leaders as well as in theirs.
Israel has one of the strongest militaries in the world. We have done a lot to pay for that and support them. They also have, although they will not admit it, nuclear weapons. There's clear proof of that, although they will not admit it. And Israel sometimes is paranoid. Israel, it's biblical. You can't have peace without justice. Israel wants peace but not justice, and you can't have peace without justice. We need to work with all the nations of the region to ensure that there's real justice so there can be real peace.
Well, we have drawn to the end of our time here. It's now 8:15. Would you join me in giving the panelists a hand? You know, I think it's fair to say that we have a bipartisan friendliness here, and if you guys want to come up and talk or ask one more question or two, feel free to do that. Get out there and vote. I think it's a right that we enjoy here in the United States, and we would encourage you to do that and continue thinking through the issues. Thank you very much for coming.
One vote for